welcome to another episode of Cookalong with Katie from Cookery Doodle Doo, and we're going to make some gnocchi today. So gnocchi are little potato dumplings. They're essentially a form of Italian pasta, but they're made with potato. And I'm just going to show you how to make them. They're really, really easy. The only thing I ask is, traditionally you would cook these by boiling them. I actually don't think they're very nice that way, so I'm going to suggest some different ways to cook them at the end, but just have a think about that when you decide how you're going to use these. Okay, so what I've got here is a baked potato, and this is still warm. It's not hot, I can still hold it, but it's much easier to mash the potato if it's warm and not gone cold. So what I'm just going to do is cut this in half. There we go, and I'm going to get as much potato out of the skin as I can using a spoon onto this plate here. So I'm really going to scrape it out. If you want to, you can cut these skins up once they're empty. Just cut them into sort of little strips and toss them with some seasoning and some oil, and you can pop these back in the oven and they will crisp up and make beautiful potato skins that are a lovely snack. So don't waste them, they can live to do another job. It's much better to use baked potato for this recipe if you can, because the potato is a lot drier. If you're using leftover mashed potato, then you will probably need to add quite a lot of extra flour. If you're able to, if you can boil the potatoes still in their skin, so don't cut them up at all, just boil them whole, then that will help just keep that water out. But certainly if you've if you're using leftover mash where you peeled the potatoes first, then you're probably going to need quite a lot of extra flour on top of what I'm suggesting here. Okay, so I'll just get rid of those bits of skin. And then what I'm going to do is just use a fork, or you can use a potato masher, or if you've got a potato ricer, anything like that. Just move those so you can see. I'm just going to, don't worry if there's the odd little bit of skin. I'm going to mash this up really well. You don't want any lumps left in there at all. So obviously if you do this on a chopping board or a plate with a fork, then children can get really involved with helping with this. I do find the texture a lot better from baked potato. It's much more creamy than one that's been boiled. There we go. So it's lovely and soft, lump free. So what I'm going to do now is pop this into a mixing bowl, but I'm going to weigh it as I go. So if you've got digital scales, obviously it's going to be much, much easier. But any way you can, if possible, try and weigh your potato. If you can't, you'll have to do it by eye, which is fine if it still works. So I've got 170 grams there of potato. Okay, so I'm going to add about half of, well, I am going to add half of that weight in flour. So half of 170 is 85. So I'm just going to zero that. And I'm adding in my 85 grams of plain flour. As I say, you might need a bit more than that if the potato is quite wet, but we'll start with that and see how we go. Okay, and then to this I'm going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I'm going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of turmeric as well. You don't have to use the turmeric at all. I just think it gives them a lovely, lovely golden colour. If you wanted to, you could add some chopped fresh herbs, or you could add some different spices. I wouldn't suggest dried herbs because they won't really have the opportunity to kind of rehydrate, so they'll just be a bit kind of crunchy and get stuck in your teeth. I'm just mixing that together just until it all begins to stick. Don't want to work it too much because it all needs to get tough, but obviously it does all need to stick together. Once it begins to go like that, it's time to scrape off your fork and get your hands in there. Hopefully, because you're cooking, you've already washed your hands and they should be nice and clean. But just have a think about whether you've had a sneeze or anything before you get your hands in there. And you can see if I just squeeze that together with my hand, that's coming together beautifully. It's formed a nice ball of dough. There we go, just clean my hands off a bit. So actually now that flour's gone in, it's relatively sticky, but it's definitely something I can work with. If you do need to add more flour because it's really, really sticky, then by all means do so, but just bear in mind the more flour you add, the tougher the dumplings are going to be, and actually the more floury they'll taste. They'll begin to taste less of potato, which is obviously kind of the point. Okay, so I'll just clean my hands. I've got some flour here. I'm just going to flour the table quite well. And then basically what we want to do is make a big long sausage. I'm going to work in 2 pieces just because it's a little bit easier. And I'm just going to roll it out. You can just do it in one big long sausage if you want to. There we go. Let me just do the other one. Let's try and have it a relatively even thickness all the way along so that they cook. It's about the same length of time. So if you find you're getting a thin bit, try and find a fat bit instead and focus on that. There we go. So those are our sausages. And then the traditional way to do this is to use the fork as a guide for how wide you want them to be. So you just go along, chop them up, just using a cutlery knife. It doesn't need to be a sharp knife. Now, if you were going to boil these in water and then toss them in the pasta sauce, which, as I've already said, I'm not a fan of, but it is the traditional way to do it. If you want to do that, then you need to do something to the surface to make them sort of catch the sauce. So traditionally you would use the fork prongs and just make some dents in it like that. Or you would use a finger and just poke a hole. You don't actually need to do that with these because we're not going to boil them in water. What we're going to do is roast these, or we're going to bake them in the pasta sauce, or we're going to fry them in butter, or we're going to toss them in some pan juices. Either way, we're going to cook them. It don't take very long, you're only cooking the flour, the potatoes already cooked. But we're going to cook them in the flavour that you're actually going to eat them with, rather than boiling them in water, because then they just taste watery. Right, there we go. So those are our gnocchi. So if you want to roast these, all you do now is get your bowl back, put a tablespoon of olive oil in there, and then just one by one start throwing them in, swirling them around so that they don't stick together and they don't get squashed. Coat them in the oil, tip them on a baking tray and just roast them. They'll only take about 10 minutes at 220 degrees just to make them go golden and delicious. Or if you'd like to know how to make these delicious gnocchi into a fantastic aloo gobi tray bake, watch out for my next video.